The crowd roared under a sea of flashing lights. Red, white, and blue banners rippled overhead, while the cameras fought to capture every sparkling grin. A parade of celebrities posed with polished pride, their outfits glittering louder than the anthem playing over the loudspeakers. Karoline Leavitt stepped onto the carpet without fanfare. No entourage, no designer gown, just steady footsteps, a clean navy dress, and a pin over her heart. She didn't pose. She didn't preen. She moved like someone who hadn't come for attention but for something deeper. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Whispers sharpened into sneers. Who invited a politician? She doesn't even belong here. Flashbulbs exploded around a towering figure flexing in the center. Cena. The cameras loved him. He flexed again, laughed loud enough for the microphones to catch it, soaking in the adoration. He threw a salute. So over the top, it drew another wave of cheers. Karoline kept walking, her path cut through the glitter and smoke, quiet but unshakable. As she neared the crowd of posing celebrities, John's eyes locked onto hers. The grin on his face didn't falter, but something colder flickered underneath. For a split second, the noise faded. Only two stood in that electric moment, one all optics, the other all substance, and neither one blinked. The first sparks had just flown. Cena stood under the blinding lights, chest puffed out, American flag graphics flashing behind him. The room roared with applause as he grabbed the microphone, flashing a bright, practiced smile. Cameras clicked like machine guns. Eating up every second, he launched into his speech loud, booming, and polished. But the words were empty. A parade of cliches about loving the troops and doing your part for freedom. He cracked jokes about how real service didn't mean wearing a suit and shaking hands, tossing a quick wink toward the audience. Some laughed politely, others shifted in their seats. Karoline stood at the side, silent and steady, her hands clasped in front of her. She didn't flinch. She didn't frown. But her jaw tightened ever so slightly. John's eyes found her across the stage. His smirk deepened. He wasn't done. He leaned into the microphone, voice dropping low in mock sincerity. "Let's hear it for the real heroes," he said, drawing out the word. "The ones who don't just show up for the photo ops." The laughter was thinner this time. A few heads turned toward Karoline. Cameras panned. Someone in the crowd muttered under their breath. The moment passed like a crack of lightning. Quick but unforgettable. Later at the group photo session, the tension snapped even tighter. Celebrities lined up, sparkling under the lights, flashing their best angles. Karoline stood at the edge, quiet, letting others crowd the front. She wasn't here for glamour. She wasn't here for applause. John swaggered into the center, wrapping an arm around another A-lister. As they adjusted for the cameras, he leaned over, stage whispering just loud enough for those nearby and the microphones to catch. "Look at her," he said, chuckling. "Optics in a suit. Bet she rehearsed that serious face in the mirror." Snickers bubbled from a few hangers-on. The sound of the crowd shifted, uneasy. Some laughed. Others stared at Karoline, watching for her reaction. Karoline didn't move. She didn't blink. Her face stayed calm, almost peaceful. But her presence grew heavier, commanding the space without saying a single word. Across the carpet, a few veterans noticed. One shook his head in disgust. Another crossed his arms. It wasn't funny. Not at all. And the cameras? They caught everything. Crystal clear. By the time the photo op ended, whispers had already started slipping through the crowd. Reporters tapped their phones. Tweets fired off like sparks. Dax optics. Battle began creeping across social media quiet. At first, then louder, faster, screens lit up backstage. Producers whispered into earpieces. Publicists began sweating. People weren't just talking about the Veterans Gala anymore. They were talking about this. About them. Karoline's team felt the storm coming before it fully hit. In private, they urged caution. Walk away. Don't make it bigger. But Karoline knew it wasn't about her image. It wasn't about winning. A headline. It was about something bigger. This wasn't some Hollywood game. This was about the meaning of service, about the people who lived it when no one was watching, about those who didn't have cameras or press teams or studio lighting to make their sacrifices sparkle. If she stayed silent now, the message would be clear. Image wins, optics win, The loudest, flashiest patriot gets the last word. Not tonight. Veterans watching from the back of the room exchanged glances. Some pulled out their phones, recording quietly, documenting. Karoline adjusted her jacket, her movements slow, deliberate. She didn't need a stage to command attention. She didn't need a spotlight to tell the truth. She only needed the moment, and it was coming faster than anyone realized. The after-party buzzed with forced laughter and clinking glasses. Glitzy lights bathed the hall in soft gold, but the atmosphere had shifted sharp, almost electric with tension. Karoline moved through the crowd with a quiet gravity. She wasn't chasing cameras, wasn't shaking hands for the sake of appearances. She nodded politely when spoken to, but her eyes, steady, piercing, never wavered. Across the room, Cena held court. Fans, influencers, and minor celebrities flocked around him like moths to a flame. He joked, he posed, he laughed louder than necessary. Yet underneath the charm, there was something brittle about him now. His jokes carried an edge, a sharpness born of someone who had pushed a little too far and knew it. Their paths crossed again at the bar. It wasn't planned. It was inevitable. Karoline ordered water, her voice calm and even. John, half-turned with a drink in hand, caught sight of her and grinned a big, fake, TV-ready grin. "Hey!" he boomed, clapping her lightly on the shoulder, too familiar, too loud. "Lighten up, soldier, it's a party, not a funeral." A few heads turned. A few chuckles rose, awkward and strained. Karoline didn't flinch. She turned slightly toward him, her expression unreadable. "Respect isn't a joke," she said, voice low but carrying enough weight to cut through the noise. Around them, the laughter died. Conversation stalled. A strange, thick silence settled. John blinked, momentarily thrown off. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second, just long enough for those paying attention to see. Then he barked out a laugh, raising his glass like a shield. "Hey, no disrespect. We all appreciate your service," he said, voice dripping with mock sincerity. "You guys are the real heroes, right? Always so serious, though. Smile a little, will ya?" This time, no one laughed. Karoline's gaze didn't budge. "Service isn't a costume you put on when the cameras are rolling," she said, her words crisp, each syllable like a stone dropping into still water. "It's not a punchline." More people were listening now, phones discreetly raised, live streams whispered to life. John's face reddened slightly. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in public, especially not by someone who wasn't playing the fame game. "You know what?" he snapped, voice sharp. "I've done more for the troops with my appearances and charity work than half the people in uniform ever will." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Someone dropped their glass. It shattered on the floor with a piercing crack. Karoline didn't even blink. She stepped forward, closing the space between them by just a fraction. Not aggressive, just present. "You don't serve by making noise," she said, voice steady. "You serve by showing up when no one's watching, when there's no applause." The words hit harder than a punch. Even John knew it. His mouth opened, then closed. For the first time all night, he looked unsure of himself. Behind Karoline, a few veterans had gathered, silent, watching, not confronting, just standing, a quiet wall of presence. The weight of it made the room feel smaller, tighter. Social media exploded. Clips were already spreading, tagged with things like "True Service," "Honor over Optics," and "Cena vs. Karoline." Backstage, Karoline's team huddled, publicists scrambled, sponsors started calling, executives debated whether to intervene. But Karoline didn't waver. She wasn't calculating moves on a chessboard. She was standing for something that didn't need a strategy to be real. The world was watching, and it was only just beginning. The aftermath was instant and merciless. Within minutes, the clip of Karoline calmly standing her ground against Cena had gone viral. News outlets scrambled for headlines, each one louder than the last. "Veteran confronts Cena at gala." Real hero. Silences Hollywood. When respect meets reality. Karoline versus Cena. Karoline didn't check her phone. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the room. Eyes that had once skimmed past her were now locked onto her with new reverence or fear. Maybe both. Meanwhile, Cena retreated to a VIP corner, surrounded by his handlers and sycophants. Their hushed whispers and frantic texting couldn't mask the panic. His brand was taking a hit, and he knew it, but it wasn't. An event organizer, pale and sweating, approached Karoline timidly. "Would you, mind stepping aside? Maybe let's take a breather in the lounge," he stammered. Karoline stared at him for a long beat, then shook her head once, sharply. "I'm not hiding." The organizer flinched like he'd been slapped. He mumbled something and backed away, leaving Karoline exactly where she was, in the center of it all, unshaken. It wasn't bravado. It wasn't arrogance. It was something deeper, a refusal to let truth be diluted just because it made people uncomfortable. But John Cena, fueled by anger, embarrassment, and wounded ego, wasn't about to let it go. He emerged from his corner, striding back toward her with the kind of swagger that looked rehearsed. Cameras snapped. People whispered. "Look," he said, loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "I'm sorry you're offended, really. But maybe you should remember who you're talking to before you disrespect someone who's done a hell of a lot more good than just carrying a gun." Gasps erupted. Phones rose higher. The air turned electric with disbelief. Karoline's lips parted slightly, not with surprise, but with measured fury. She took one step closer, so close that the noise seemed to fall away. "You're not bigger than the sacrifices made by those who never got a parade," she said, her voice cutting clean through the crowd. "Fame doesn't make you untouchable. Service doesn't ask for a spotlight. It asks for heart." For a moment, Cena looked as if he might fire back a sarcastic remark, a deflection, but he hesitated. In her eyes, he saw something unbreakable, something no PR team could spin, no apology could erase. Someone began clapping. Just one person at first, an older veteran in a worn dress uniform standing near the back. Then another, and another. Within seconds, the hall echoed with a slow, steady, respectful applause. Not the frenzied adulation of fans, but the solemn, deliberate acknowledgement of truth, spoken without fear. Cena's face twisted anger, humiliation, regret, before he turned and stalked away. His entourage scrambling after him, Karoline stood alone in the center of the room, the applause washing over her. But she didn't smile. She didn't bask in it. She didn't raise a victorious fist or pose for the cameras. She simply nodded once to the veterans who had started it all, a quiet gesture of gratitude among those who understood the weight of silence, the power of standing tall when it mattered most. Backstage, executives huddled in damage control meetings. Sponsors began drafting statements. John Cena's social media team posted a rushed, bland apology that was immediately shredded, online for its insincerity. Meanwhile, Karoline's team received offers, interviews, endorsements, speaking engagements, but she waved them off. "I didn't come here for a brand deal," she said simply. She returned to her modest apartment that night, alone, away from the roaring storm she had unintentionally created. But the ripples were already unstoppable. This wasn't just a viral moment. It was the beginning of a movement. The grand hall had never looked grander. Crystal chandeliers rained golden light across velvet curtains and marble floors. Tables dripped with fine linens and cutlery that gleamed like weaponry. Everywhere, there were cameras, large news crews, private documentarians, even influencer vloggers with their ring lights flashing. Celebrities floated through the room in designer tuxedos and ball gowns. Champagne glasses clinked gently between whispered conversations. Veterans dotted the crowd too, their uniforms neat but modest, their faces quietly weathered, and at the very center of it all, John Cena. He stood on the sprawling stage, bathed in flattering lights, clutching the microphone like a scepter. His smile was practiced, his stance heroic, and, when he spoke, his voice rolled over the hall with polished precision. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "we are gathered here to celebrate the sacrifices of those brave enough to put service above self. It's a cause close to my heart. It's why I wear these colors, every day, in everything I do." The crowd erupted in applause, cameras flashing. Wildly, it was a masterclass in public relations. Every phrase he uttered had been rehearsed, every nod to patriotism fine-tuned to trigger standing ovations. And yet something about the applause felt hollow. There were cheers, yes. There were even a few whoops, But beneath the noise, there was an unmistakable stiffness. Some clapped out of obligation, others exchanged glances, brows slightly furrowed. Even among the veterans, a few polite smiles barely masked their unease. It was admiration tainted with suspicion, celebration soured by something left unspoken John didn't notice, or maybe he chose not to. He powered through his speech, peppering it with phrases like duty, valor, and never forget, safe words, crowd pleasers, the kind of language that cost nothing and meant even less when weighed against real blood, real sacrifice. Finally, he flashed his signature grin and gestured to the audience. "Tonight," he said grandly, "we honor heroes. Let's remember, the world watches how we treat our warriors." As the crowd offered another strained round of applause, a ripple of motion stirred at the back of the hall. Karoline was moving. No dress, no jewelry, no makeup artistry, just her uniform jacket, slightly worn at the cuffs, and a gaze as steady as a rifle barrel. She stepped toward the stage without hesitation. Cutting through clusters of wealthy guests and camera crews, the gala organizer, pale and frantic, tried to intercept her, but Karoline brushed past him like he didn't exist. The murmuring started almost immediately. Whispers floated up like, "Smoke. Is that her? She's the one from the clip. What's she doing?" John, sensing the shift, paused mid-sentence. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second before snapping back into place. He squinted through the lights, recognizing her immediately. For the first time that night, real tension crackled in. The room. Karoline mounted the steps onto the stage, her boots making sharp, deliberate sounds against the polished wood. She didn't grab the mic. She didn't pose. Instead, she turned slowly to face the audience. Her voice, when it came, didn't need amplification. It was low, clear, and devastatingly real. "I came here tonight," she said, "not to be honored, not to be photographed, not to sell an image. I came because service, real service, isn't about being seen." The room stilled. Even the cameras seemed to freeze in place, as if afraid to interrupt. "Service," she continued, "is about what you do when no one's watching. It's about sacrifice, without expectation, about loyalty without applause." Her words sliced through the glamour, like a blade through silk. Somewhere near the back, a celebrity in a glittering gown lowered her phone. A politician shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A veteran in full uniform wiped at his eye without shame. John Cena stood frozen a few feet away, the spotlight still on him, but the power had shifted. It wasn't his stage anymore. It belonged to the truth. And Karoline was just getting started. Karoline let her words settle, the silence pressing down heavy on the hall. She moved a step closer to the edge of the stage, her hands relaxed at her sides, her stance grounded and unshakable. "Too often," she said, "the sacrifices we make are packaged into slogans, turned into ad campaigns, used as decorations for people who have never known a real battlefield, unless it was the battle to stay relevant." Another sharp, painful ripple through the room. Somewhere backstage, a technician fumbled with a headset. An event manager whispered frantically into a walkie-talkie. John shifted from one foot to the other, clutching the microphone tighter, as if it might anchor him. Karoline wasn't finished. "There's a difference," she said, her voice cutting through the thickening discomfort between honoring service and wearing it like a costume. A low murmur of agreement rose from the veterans in the audience, and then Karoline gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. The giant screen behind her flickered to life. Footage began to play raw, unedited, and undeniable. It showed John backstage. Before the gala, waving off a group of veterans who had tried to approach him, he laughed loudly into his phone, casually brushing past a man in a wheelchair. His voice, crystal clear on the leaked recording, was brutal in its indifference. "I'm busy, bro. Get somebody else to shake their hands." The hall collectively recoiled. The footage rolled on. More clips, John rehearsing his speech in front of a mirror, practicing his humble smile, reminding his assistant to cue the tears at the end. The mask was slipping, cracking, shattering. In real time, the carefully built illusion that John had spent years cultivating was burning to ash. The cameras, once so eager to capture his every pose, now lingered mercilessly on his frozen face. You could feel the room turn, A wave of realization washed over the audience, disbelief giving way to disappointment. Then disgust. Celebrities stopped smiling, veterans crossed their arms. Politicians suddenly found the floor tiles fascinating. Even the news anchors, who had come ready with glowing scripts, now whispered urgently into their mics, scrambling to adjust their narratives, and John, standing there, exposed, humiliated, tried to salvage it. He forced a small chuckle, tried to make a joke. Guess I'm not as good at surprises as I thought, huh? Silence, heavy, brutal, suffocating. Karoline turned to him, not with hatred, not even with anger, but with the kind of pity reserved for those who had lost their way so completely they didn't even realize it. She took a step closer. Respect, she said, her voice steady and final, isn't a costume you can put on when it's convenient. It's a way you live when no one's watching. The final blow landed not with a scream, but with the soft certainty of undeniable truth. John lowered the microphone, his face pale under the hot lights. No applause came to rescue him this time. No chants, no cheers, just the sea of faces staring back at him. Faces that once adored him, now filled with contempt, sadness, and something worse, indifference. Karoline gave a small nod to the veterans scattered throughout the room. Then, without waiting for permission or recognition, she turned and walked off the stage, leaving John standing there, stranded, insignificant, forgotten. The audience's gaze didn't follow him anymore. They followed her. They saw where real respect lived now. And it wasn't with John Cena. It was with the woman who didn't need the spotlight to tell the truth. The days following Karoline's devastating revelation were a whirlwind of headlines, social media outrage, and corporate shakeups. John's attempt to salvage what remained of his career was both swift and pitiful. He began with a series of apology posts across his social media platforms. They were expertly worded, carefully crafted, statements written by a team of PR specialists. But to anyone who had witnessed the event unfold, they rang hollow. "I'm sorry for any disrespect I may have caused," one post read. "I respect all those who serve, and I stand with our veterans." The words felt rehearsed, lacking the sincerity that could have salvaged even a fraction of his dignity. The post was accompanied by a picture of John in military fatigues, a forced grin on his face, hands clasped in front of him, a stark contrast to the man who had brushed aside veterans backstage. But apologies, it seemed, could not erase the memory of his actions. As the days went on, the fallout only deepened. Sponsors began to quietly pull away. First, it was one, then another, and another. It wasn't a dramatic public statement. It wasn't a sudden press conference. No, this was quieter. Behind-the-scenes unraveling. Corporate partners pulled their endorsements, citing changing brand values. The silence of these withdrawals was deafening. It spoke volumes without uttering a single word. Fans who had once idolized him now turned against him in droves. The hashtag #RealRespect began trending, but not for the reasons John had hoped. This time, the phrase wasn't about his charity work or his supposed goodwill. It became a rallying cry, a sharp condemnation of his empty gestures. People flooded social media with photos of veterans, active service members, and everyday heroes, none of whom wore a facade. They wore truth, lived truth, and above all, earned respect. John's reputation, once a carefully maintained empire, was now a crumbling ruin. Every attempt he made to rebuild it only pushed him further into the shadows. Meanwhile, Karoline refused to engage with the media. She declined every interview, request, every opportunity to capitalize on her newfound fame. There were no victory speeches, no grandstanding. Her silence was her statement. In a world addicted to attention, her refusal to speak was louder than any words. Veterans' organizations that had long been sidelined in the glittering world of entertainment stepped forward to offer their thanks. Their messages were simple but powerful. "Thank you, Karoline," they said. "You stood for us when no one else would." It wasn't about the media circus. It wasn't about the spotlight. It was about standing firm in the face of a world that often overlooked those who served. And the press, initially focused on John's decline, began to crown Karoline the new hero. Headlines shifted, truth over. Optics became the new mantra. Karoline, without fanfare, had become the embodiment of real respect, a stark contrast to the hollow fame that had once buoyed John. She was not a celebrity in the traditional sense, but she had something far more valuable: integrity. The truth, unvarnished and unapologetic, had found its champion. Karoline's quiet walk off the stage had sparked a movement, and the consequences were still rippling through the world of entertainment and beyond. For Karoline, the victory wasn't in the applause, it wasn't in the interviews, it was in her refusal to compromise her values. She didn't need fame, and she didn't need the spotlight. Her dignity, unblemished by the need for validation, spoke louder than any red carpet ever could. As the noise around John quieted, the public began to remember what true heroism looked like, not in glossy PR campaigns or carefully scripted speeches, but in the unwavering courage to stand for what's right. And Karoline had done just that. She walked away from the stage, not with a celebrity's ego, but with the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who had won a battle far greater than any media campaign or adoration could offer. Her legacy, like her, would endure far longer than any fame could ever last. Months had passed since that monumental night in the Grand Hall, but its impact lingered, especially for Karoline. While John faded quietly from the spotlight, Karoline's quiet strength continued to resonate. She became a symbol of integrity, her actions speaking louder than words ever could. She had stood up for those who were overlooked, those who didn't have a voice, and in doing so, she gained a respect that was far more powerful than any fame or fortune. John, on the other hand, disappeared from the public's favor. His career, once propelled by his image, crumbled under the weight of his inauthenticity. His hollow apologies were met with ridicule, and his sponsors quietly severed ties, pulling away from someone who no longer embodied the values they once endorsed. His decline wasn't fast or dramatic. It was a quiet erosion of trust, a slow but inevitable fade from relevance. Karoline didn't seek interviews or accolades. She didn't need them. Her refusal to be part of the media circus only elevated her in the eyes of those who mattered most, the veterans she stood for. She lived her life with the same humility she always had, walking away from the fame that would have followed, choosing instead to maintain her dignity. In the years that followed, Karoline's legacy grew. She became a quiet hero, not for the applause, but for her courage in standing up to an entire industry built on optics. In the end, she reminded everyone that respect wasn't something you could fake. It was something you had to earn through actions, not appearances.